So I loved her stamina. I loved, did you catch it though? As soon as she was blind, she talked about going to school and met resistance and people being mean and this kind of a thing, but she pushed through. She carried on. And today's story is related to that. And so here we go. We're in John chapter 9. We're going to read the whole thing, point out some things, and then we'll see what God does with it. So walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, causing him to be born blind?" This was a legitimate question way back then. They literally thought that God would mete out his justice and wrath through your children. And there are cases in the Bible where they thought that that really happened. There was even a case in the Bible in theological history where they thought it could even happen in utero. Like maybe the babies in utero would be sinning against each other. And that's crazy to think about, or that even a grandparent could have sinned and it shows up in a grandchild. So that's kind of a primitive way of thinking, but honestly, we still struggle with that today sometimes. Even though cognitively we say, we know mentally that's not how it works, except for in the most obvious circumstances when maybe there's substance abuse or something like that involved. But most of the time we recognize, this is not God causing this to happen in this way. It's some kind of a justice measure. And yet I've met parents whose children have been born with greater struggle than most kids. And they entertain this question. So it hits our reptilian brains. It makes us wonder, how do we make sense of this stuff? And Jesus totally reframes that, even though it was a very early time. And he said, "You're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause-effect here. Look instead for what God can do. We need to be energetically at work for the one who sent me here, working while the sun shines. When night falls, the workday's over. For as long as I am in the world, there is plenty of light. I am the world's light." Now, this little chunk that Jesus just said, what the disciples really heard was blah, 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 blah. So John has given us this. He's writing for us. Remember, this is a story written for us by a community that this writing came decades after Jesus' life. And so this is a little precursor about what we're going to see happen, about this whole idea of light coming into the world, which is a theme throughout John. And he said this, "And then spit in the dust, made a clay paste with saliva, rubbed the paste on the blind man's eyes, and said, 'Go wash at the pool of Siloam,'" which means sent. The man went and washed and saw. Now, this is kind of a cool thing. Well, it's a cool thing on lots of levels, but this whole idea that it's at the pool of Siloam, Siloam means sent, so Jesus is telling a guy, sending a guy to the pool of Siloam, which means sent. That's kind of interesting. And the other thing that's interesting is this pool is not a natural occurrence, but it was created under King Hezekiah centuries and centuries before. And this king knew that there was a great likelihood that they would be under siege someday. So he had his engineers work together a system so that they could bring water from a spring into the city walls so that they couldn't be, ferreted out because they were dying of thirst, literally. So here's a pool that they're drinking life from that was because somebody had the audacity to do something crazy like build these series of tunnels to create this spring-fed pool. And now somebody else has had the courage to go wash their eyes off in the same pool, and they are experiencing life as well in a very different way. So soon the town was buzzing. His relatives and those who year after year had seen him as a blind man begging were saying, "Why, isn't this the man we knew who sat here and begged?" And others said, "It's him, all right." But others objected. "It's not the same man at all. It just looks like him." And he said, "It's me, the very one." And they said, "How did you get your eyes opened?" And he explained, "A man named Jesus made a paste and rubbed it on my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.'" Now, you might be wondering, why did Jesus do this nutty thing? Back in that day, it was believed that a first-time father, that there was magical power in his spit. And they also attributed that to somebody like Jesus, who because he wasn't a father, who definitely had the Spirit of God at work in him, that something was magical in his spit. Now, was there something magical in Jesus' spit? I don't know. It doesn't sound like it to me. I don't know anybody's spit that's terribly magical. But who knows how God is working with this guy and this guy's beliefs. So this guy is feeling this spit paste. He knows what's going on, and it's happened to him. Who knows how God works with that, works with our belief systems, our constructs, to bring about healing. But anyway, nonetheless, it was Jesus' spit that made the paste, that went on his eyes, that caused him to see. So he told me, go to Siloam and wash. I did what he said. When I washed, I saw. So where is he? And he says, I don't know. I haven't seen him. Because he hasn't seen him yet, right? He left Jesus to go wash the stuff off his eyes. So they marched the man to the Pharisees. This day when Jesus made the paste and healed his blindness was the Sabbath. There's an ancient law that said, you shall not knead dough on the Sabbath. It's considered as work. Keep that in mind, because when Jesus made this spit paste, he is kneading. He's working on the Sabbath. The Pharisees grilled the blind man, formerly blind man, again on how he had come to see. And he said, he put a clay paste on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, obviously, this man can't be from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. Others countered, oh, how can a bad man do miraculous, God-revealing things like this? And so there was a split in their ranks. They came back to the blind man. You're the expert. He opened your eyes. What do you say about him? He said, he is a prophet. Now just realize what's shaping here. The title of today's atomic thing, Small Changes Make a Big Difference, is Q&A. And the small thing that's happening here that makes a huge difference is the asking of a question. It is curiosity. This guy probably could have gone the rest of his life and not thought too deep about this thing, except that some miracle guy came along and now he can see, whereas he couldn't before. But because somebody's asking him questions about the character and nature of the one who healed him, he's having to think more deeply about who it was that did this to him. And he realizes that maybe more is at play here. That this thing could only have been done by God, because in their way of thinking, what just happened was the erasure of sin. And in their theology, the only person who can forgive sin is God. And so he's recognizing, oh, now that I think about this, forgiveness has happened to me in the way my brain works, he says to himself. So this guy's clearly a messenger from God, which is what a prophet is. He's a prophet. Well, the Jews, specifically the leadership, didn't believe this. I'll talk about why he just says the Jews in general right there. But the Pharisees didn't believe it, didn't believe the man was blind to begin with. So they called the parents of the man, now bright-eyed with sight. And they asked them, is this your son, the one you say was born blind? So how is it that he now sees? His parents said, well, we know he's our son, and we know he was born blind. But we don't know how he came to see, haven't a clue about who opened his eyes. Why don't you ask him? He's a grown man and can speak for himself. His parents were talking like this because they were intimidated by the Jewish leaders, who had already decided that anyone who took a stand that this was the Messiah would be kicked out of the meeting place. That's why his parents said, ask him, he's a grown man. Now some of you might think, what wimpy parents. They're getting kicked out of church and they can't even pay that little price. Well, let's hold on a moment. We're not talking about kicked out of church. If I kicked you out of Crosswalk, or I can't really do that, but if the board decided to kick you out of Crosswalk, or the membership decided to vote you out of Crosswalk for some reason, which I don't think has ever happened in the history of Crosswalk to my recollection, you know what you would say? Well, you might give us a one-finger salute and head on to another church in town. That's what you might do, because there are dozens of other churches in town for you to inhabit. You don't have that luxury in Jerusalem. You've got the temple. The temple. This is the head honcho. And they're saying you're kicked out. So you might even say at that point, well, If they're going to hurt my son like this, if they're going to make such a clamor about my kid, then forget it. Who needs them anyway? I'll miss the singing and the songs and the potlucks and everything, but we can figure this thing out on our own. Really? What if they're telling you that the only way you can be reconciled or okay with God is through their word and through your cultic practices with them, your sacrifices that you make, your attendance at the different feasts and so forth? That ramps it up. And how about if they withhold from you, particularly those of you who are retired, your Social Security income and your Social Security benefits? Those wonderful socialistic things that we enjoy here in our country. Your health care, gone. Your check, gone. Because that's what was at stake for these people. This was no small decision on their part, which is why they are being so strategic with the way they answered. In truth, they didn't know who this Jesus was, but they knew that if they got the cart before the horse prematurely, there was a chance they were going to lose their means of support. Remember, at this time in history, 99.9% of the people are dirt poor. They rely on the temple and they rely on the offerings that have been given over time to provide them the means they need just to survive. And that's almost going to be ripped away from them. So, open your eyes to what's really at stake here for this family. So give credit to God. They called the man back a second time, the man who had been blind, and told him, give credit to God. We know this man is an imposter. Just remember that they asked him to give credit to God. That's another way of saying worship God for this miracle. And he replied, I know nothing about that one way or the other, this person who healed him. But I know one thing for sure. I was blind, I now see. They said, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he responds, I've told you over and over, and you haven't listened. Why do you want to hear it again? Are you so eager to become his disciples? That went over pretty well. So with that, they jumped all over him. You might be a disciple of that man, but we're disciples of Moses. We know for sure that God spoke to Moses, but we have no idea where this man even comes from. And the man replied, this is amazing. You claim to know nothing about him, but the fact is, he opened my eyes. It's well known that God isn't at the beck and call of sinners, but listens carefully to anyone who lives in reverence and does his will. That someone opened the eyes of a man born blind, has never been heard of, ever. If this man didn't come from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. They said, you're nothing but dirt. How dare you take that tone with us? Then they threw him out in the street. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out and went and found him. Isn't that cool? That seems to be a character and nature of God thing, that when we get thrown out for doing the right thing, it doesn't mean God is not with us. So Jesus finds him and went and found him. And he asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? That's Jesus' favorite title for himself. The man said, point him out to me, sir, so that I can believe him, because he hasn't seen him yet. And Jesus said, you're looking right at him. Don't you recognize my voice? Master. That's just a statement of respect. I believe, the man said, and worshiped him. So what the Pharisees wanted to have happen actually happened. He gave credit to God for this miracle right here. Jesus then said, I came into the world to bring everything into the clear light of day, making all the distinctions clear, so that those who have never seen will see, and those who have made a great pretense of seeing will be exposed as blind. Some Pharisees overheard him and said, does that mean you're calling us blind? Jesus said, if you were really blind, you wouldn't be blameless. But since you claim to see everything so well, you're accountable for every fault and failure. So let's talk about this. This is a story about a blind man, faith, God, humanity, process, your life, my life, all life, and systems. So let me walk you through some of this stuff, because there's a lot here for us. You may think this is totally irrelevant to your life because you're not blind and we don't live in the first century, and maybe you don't even believe in physical healing anyway, so why did I waste my time waking up an extra hour early today just to come be bothered with this nonsense that Pete is going to put forth? Let's first talk about how this gospel came to us. Remember, this was a group of Jesus-following Jewish people, probably in the city of Ephesus, and they are gathering together with other Jewish people. They're going through the same stuff that they always did as Jewish people. Why? Because they're Jewish people. So they're coming together weekly for synagogue teaching. They're going through the rituals. When it comes times for the big feast, they make their way to Jerusalem. They're doing everything a good Jewish person would do, except one thing. As they're talking in circles and around tables, they're talking about new insight they gained from a guy named Jesus, who was looked at as a Jewish reformer, who started to say some things that were buried in history from long dead theologians and biblical historians, that in language we would use, and some nuanced new insights that he was also coming up with. But he was giving fresh wind to the Jewish tradition and helping them see things in new, insightful ways that challenged the status quo. And as they in their circle would remember the teachings of Jesus and what he said and all the stories and all that, it caused problems with that Jewish community. And over time, that Jewish community said, we can't take what you're saying anymore, and the time has come for us to part ways. So be parted. And so they went as a collection of Jewish people who believed in Jesus, who were wounded and are hurting because the mothership sliced them off because they didn't want to hear this new take on a very old faith. This is systems theory in action, by the way. This is how it works most of the time. It works in corporate settings, school settings, family settings, and this is usually how it goes. One person has a new idea, a new behavior, whatever the case may be, and they enter into that system, be it a workplace, school place, a team, a marriage, family dynamic, whatever, and they start doing the new thing, new insight, new ways of being. And the system, which has been getting along just fine, surviving as good as it can, even if it's a bad system, it's still going to make sure that it stays together. This new thing comes in, and it becomes a threat to the actual system itself. And what does the system do? They have tension with this thing. The more time goes on with this new thing trying to be in an old system, the tension gets worse and worse and worse. According to a guy named Friedman, who developed and really put this down on paper in the 1980s with a book called Generation, he says that at some point, because of this tension, what's called the identified patient shows up. The identified patient isn't the problem, but the identified patient is the one that's making all the noise, that there is a problem. In family systems, this is often children. The children don't know what's going on, but they feel the pressure, and they don't know what to do with the pressure, and so it sometimes comes out in weird behavior on the part of the kid that wasn't there before. The problem is not the kid. The kid's behavior is often a sign that there's something going wrong in the system. Over time, if this doesn't correct, the system always wins. And the person who is that new, the new introduction to the thing, either they shape up and get right back where they were in the system, or most of the time, they're kicked out if they don't shape up. This is family systems theory. So you may wonder, you may think it's you may think you're the only one in the world that when you introduce a new idea in your workplace, or in your friendship group, or in your family, or wherever you might go, and you got this great new bold idea, hey, let's do it this way, and it just is received for 10 minutes and then just kind of falls flat, or you're ostracized because of your new way of thinking. You might think, what have I done wrong? You haven't done anything wrong. But you have met yourself a system. Now think about this again with marriage, about how nutty it is that without any training whatsoever, except for what we've been trained in our own family systems of origin, that when you bring these two people together, holy mackerel, You can count on fireworks. You can count on conflict because you're trying to literally marry two systems together. That is not easy. So if you're in a relationship now and it's not easy, okay, guess what? That's normal. And maybe if we normalize this system behavior, which is everywhere, then instead of getting emotionally riled up and think, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, maybe we can look at it and just say, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm a part of a system here. And maybe there are things that need to be corrected in the system that's going to allow for new things, but this is more than me. So if that's all you walk away from today is to know that this is normal, well, that's good. And that's exactly what happened here. That happened with this community of faith that gave us the Gospel of John. They were ostracized because they challenged the system, and the system was bigger than they were, and the system kicked them out. But this is also a story of faith and healing and a guy that was blind. And so we got to look at that because that's related to the whole other thing of systems and how we interact and are growing our faith and all this stuff. And so this guy was invited into this process. And let's take a moment to just applaud this guy, this formerly blind guy, because what he did was incredible. We often look at a guy like this and we're like, what do you mean? All he did was walk to the pool of Siloam and wash his eyes off. How hard could that be? Back up the truck. This guy was born blind. His whole life, he's been the poster child of sin in the world. Anytime people walked by this kid and threw a nickel in his can, it was like, you're a sign of God's judgment. Feel sorry for you. I'll help you out. And this poor kid was in a system. He was in a system that was providing for him. And this system that was providing for him was making sure that he got food every day, that he was alive all these years, so now he's an adult of some age. The system, in a weird way, is working for him. And now some guy comes along and asks if he wants to see. Now, if you're a kid that's been blind since birth, and you've been hanging out begging for your whole life for some help, how many times do you think you've heard somebody come along and say, if you just do this, I think this is your miracle cure? How many dozens of times has he heard this? How many hundreds of times has he gotten his hopes up when Aunt Betty said, well, I'm going to ask my prayer group, and we've seen good things happen, so you just hold on. How many times has this guy had some person put snake oil on his eyes and nothing worked? How many times has an extra sacrifice been made at the temple only for it not to work one more time? Can you imagine? I think some of you can. How much courage it took for this guy to say yes to having Jesus make a spit mud paste and wipe it on your eyes. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you've been through your version of this. Maybe you're the kid in school that got bullied. And you're being told one more time by your parent, oh, just don't let him get to you. Maybe you're the person at work that sees something terribly wrong and you're about to report it. And you've done it before and gotten your butt kicked. And somebody's saying, you just got to do the right thing. Or you're in a marriage of some odd years and things aren't going great and they haven't gone great for a long time. And you've tried stuff, but it just keeps going right back to the same problems again and again and again. And now there's this new idea. Well, just try this new thing. And you're like, we're going to go through this again. It's going to work for a while. And then it's not going to work anymore. And some marriages get on autopilot because of that. And decades later, they're right where they were. Same problems. With no hope. Because they've tried and it hasn't worked. That's this guy. So when this guy says yes to this invitation that Jesus gives, Jesus doesn't coerce him. He doesn't tell the disciples, hey, let's dogpile that poor sucker over there and I'll make a spit mud paste and see what happens. That's not it. he invites this guy into the process because that's what God does. We're invited into this healing journey that we are all on. And this guy steps out in faith and says, yes, I'll try it again. Let's see what happens. Maybe this one will work. And this one did work. And the crazy thing is, by the way, there are some other system things that are happening here. So you got this guy who now he sees. That's going to make a believer out of you, right? I kind of believe in this guy because it actually worked this time. And so he's got strong conviction. He's feeling pretty good about his belief. He also has support somewhere out there. He doesn't know what he looks like, but Jesus is walking around, and I'm hoping that they'll be supportive. And for a little while, the crowds around him are so happy to see him walking around, seeing that they're supporting him and stuff. And that was very important because the system was going to come back and bite him. The system that had no room for this way of thinking about what this communicated about them. Because the Pharisees, when they hear about this, the reason why they keep going after him again and again and again is because they recognize that what has happened to him has also happened to them. That a truth that happened for him has also come right back at them, because in their way of seeing things, if God is going to act, it's going to be in the temple. And the people who God is going to act through are the leaders of the temple. What could it possibly mean if God did an amazing healing work outside the temple and didn't include us? What did that do to their sense of power, their sense of identity? Did they have a reason to fight back? You bet they had a reason to fight back. Have we ever seen this phenomenon happen since that time? We're seeing it right now. We've been seeing it for centuries. Church and power and who's in charge and towing the line and creating new lines to make sure that people stay outside those lines, to control, to make sure that the church still has the power that it has enjoyed. This is an ongoing human drama. And most of the time, for most people, they either, like I said, they either fall in line, and I think that does happen for most people, but now and again you get a guy like this who just keeps pushing it and says, look, I can see your face right now. As you're yelling at me, your face is getting red. I can see that because something happened to me. And because of that, I'm going to stand in my conviction. And because he stood in that, he got kicked out, because that's what systems do. But Jesus came back. Jesus found him to support him. If you want to change, by the way, if you really want to see the thing stick, if you want to beat the system, so to speak, there are a few things that you got to have in place. One, that conviction thing, if you go into it half-hearted, like, I'll give it a try, it's not going to work. If there's real conviction behind it, like you see this in recovery. What do they say? Until they hit bottom, you're not going up. Until you hit bottom and realize that you are powerless against this thing, it is going to be power all over you. That's the first step. So this conviction that, okay, there's something here that I know I got to have, and going forward with that. But if you don't have support around that, you're done. You are done. Why do so many diets that start January 1 end by January 5? It's because we can't do it alone. This is true in the faith, my friends. We live in an era that says, me, myself, and I, my lazy boy, we can just grow this faith thing as much as we want to. That's just not true. It's just not true. You will reach a ceiling and you will stop, because you need the supportive community around you to teach you, to support you, to help you break the behaviors that you're wanting to be free of, healed of. That's just part of the deal. Jesus was there to be that one. He comes back and finds him, welcomes, invites him into the fold. The guy says yes. This is how faith works, by the way. It starts off with just a new way of seeing, a new way of thinking about ourselves. God breaking in, helping us see with new eyes. And it moves from there. But even that sometimes gets stunted. And sometimes we get to a certain point, if we're kids growing up in the church like I did, I I got to fourth grade. It was about that time in my life where parents were saying, hey, time for you. You're kind of an age now to make some decisions on your own. Do you want to follow this Jesus thing? And I thought about it, and I meant it. And I was like, yep, I'll do this. And I got baptized, and I had lots of other friends who got baptized with me. And a lot of my other friends stayed right there. And in their mind, we became Christians that day. So that's the way they thought. And we're done. Now, me, I had a crisis of faith in high school. And that crisis of faith, growing up in a very Christian household, now suddenly agnostic, that led me to a whole new way of thinking. I had to see with new eyes. I had to see something else. I had outgrown where I was, and it was not fitting with life anymore, and there had to be more, and I was desperate for it. And some way or other, God helped me see new again. That process repeated itself. By the time I was in college, another crisis of faith where I'm just like, what is this thing anyway? I'd gotten to a certain level, but now I needed to see more. And in the pursuit of the more came, more was seen. I think this is how faith works. Not a one and done thing, but a careful progression where we realize we are constantly being invited forward, deeper, higher in our understanding. I was at a conference, not a conference, it was a ministry meeting of sister church pastors last week. And a friend of mine, who I've known for a few years now, he pastors a sister church in Santa Clara. Very international church, as you can imagine, kind of right around Silicon Valley and all that. They have 40 different nationalities represented in their church. You know, it's just like our church. Well, we're working on that, man, but Napa's not quite that diverse, so we aren't either quite yet, but want to be. And anyway, he's from India, and so he's a perfect match for this church. But he said a very troubling thing to the congregation when he showed up at the church. He said, if you bring me, I want you to know something, that we do not exist to make Christians. And the board kind of choked up a little bit, like, I thought that's what we were supposed to be doing. And he said, we do not exist to make Christians. We exist, and this is kind of churchy language, but we exist to make disciples of Christ. It's a very different thing. And the way we think about things now, I mean, it's semantics in one way, but the way we think about things now, we think of Christian as you've made your commitment, you've signed off on orthodoxy, you've said the magic word, you're doing some of the ritual, and so you're Christian. That's what you hit on the box of your census. But that does not necessarily mean you're a disciple of Christ. A disciple means you're walking with the one you're following. A disciple means you are interested in learning, you're growing consistently and on and on. You know what? We share that vision here. Because when we say as a church, go be Jesus, it requires that you know what that would actually mean. And the fact is, you can't be Jesus too much if you have no idea who he is. Here's some news for you. This invitation that was given to this blind guy in Jerusalem, this invitation is for you too. I don't think we're born blind. I really don't. But I think we're trained to be blind. Through our families of origin, through our culture. Maybe our blinders is that faith is just this thing, and all I got to do is just give assent to this thing mentally, and I'm a Christian, and I guess that's it. And I guess I'll go to heaven someday. Maybe, I guess. That's what the orthodoxy teaches me. And so we're blind to the much bigger, more compelling, much more beautiful, life-encompassing thing, which is more than just your life and getting your butt to heaven, but actually affects all the lives around you. And I wonder if you realize that the same invitation to see that Jesus gave that blind man in Jerusalem is the invitation you are being given today and every day. You are being invited to see, which means we recognize that we struggle with blindness. I don't know what that means for you today. We're going to take communion here in a second, which I hope everybody will enjoy. It's open to everybody. It's a very delicious cracker. followed by some grape juice. I'm not punking you this time, so no beet juice this month. Although that was fun for me. All right. But I wonder what this element means. This is the body, the representative of the body and blood of Christ. And Jesus, the night that he was betrayed, he said, I want you to take this and eat this in remembrance of me. What a funny thing to say. In remembrance of me. Me. Who is the me we're talking about? We're talking about Jesus here. What do we think about Jesus? His last name I've heard is Christ. Jesus Christ. It actually has more to do with what God is in him. Christ means anointing. In Jesus is this anointing. I wonder if part of what Jesus is saying in communion is simply, as you take and eat this and remember me, I hope you remember that the Christ that is in me is in you as well. Do you have the capacity to realize that God is truly in you, with you all the time? And maybe taking and eating this today, maybe that's your first step to realizing this whole Jesus thing is way bigger than a religion in the world and way more compelling than showing up for church and listen to me. Maybe this is the beginning where you begin to taste something new and good. And when you drink that, you realize that it is sweet and life-giving, a reminder that God is with you and even in you. Now, maybe some of you others, it means something else, and I have no idea what it could mean to every one of you, but maybe for some of you, maybe eating this is like taking the blinders off, where you realize that you haven't even thought about this stuff for a very long time. In fact, I would even say this, that if you've called yourself a Christian or a Jesus follower for some period of time, and you can't name the last time that you were in some kind of a tension where you sensed that God was asking you to stretch your way of thinking or your life or your behavior in some way, I want to challenge, I'll be so bold as to say this, I think you've fallen asleep at the wheel. I think you've stopped paying attention. I think your faith is dead at that point, because the God of creation is constantly creating and recreating. So maybe your cracker and juice today is to say, God, help me, because apparently I've become blind and I had no idea until today. Maybe this for you today is the first time that you actually say yes to this Jesus and to follow him. And to say, all right, I don't want a religion. I want a relationship with God. And so maybe today, in eating this cracker and drinking this juice, maybe that's your step today. And I hope it will be. Maybe it's something else. Maybe God's been messing with you in some way. I don't know what it is, but you do. And God does. And maybe this cracker, because all of this is a statement of yes. In one way, shape, or form. It's all saying yes to God. The question is, what does that mean to you? What question is being asked of you by God? And will you say yes? No pressure. I mean, even if this is just, yes, I'll entertain the idea, I encourage you to take and eat. But right now, I encourage you to take up the bread. What does this mean to you? What does it mean to say yes today to what the Spirit of God is doing? What does it mean for you to see today? You're going to get a second round of this, so this is just first round. Take and eat. Pretty good, doesn't it? I think that's how faith is. I think that's how it's supposed to be. I grew up with lousy communion. Did you? Awful. There's this verse in the Psalms that says, taste and see that the Lord is good. It is. It really is. Let's chase it. What are you cheering? What is a yes for you today? Think about it. Take and drink. Let's pray together. Oh God, If we could only see ourselves. If we could only see what our life looks like from your vantage point. Beautiful, wonderful, your children, you pride over us, you love us dearly, as a loving parent loves their child. It's true for every one of us, and yet you also recognize things that we can't recognize. You see our blinders. You see what's holding us back. And so what do you do as a parent who loves us? You come alongside, and as lovingly as possible, you say to us over and over and over again, hey, you want to see? You want to see? You want to see right what's before you? What you can become? Who you really are? And so the question hangs with us, God. And I pray that our answer has been meaningful this morning. But I would pray that we would also recognize that you follow us up. And you keep asking the question. God, help us not see this as a burden, but as a grand invitation to see more and more, that your beauty would only increase in our lives, not just for us, but that the world would become more beautiful as we say more and more yeses. Thank you, God. In Jesus' name, amen. Got one more song for you. I love this song called Inland that Brian's going to do. If you've got any feedback for us today, comment cards, offering, whatever, put those in the buckets. We'll collect those later. Thank you so much for coming. I hope it was good, and we'll see you next week.